Jeff Anderson and Mike Finnegan, on behalf of the now 384 survivors with whom we stand and speak and represent, knowing there's another total of 440 survivors altogether, we need to address the plan that has been put forth and the comments made surrounding it. It is our view and that of the wounded survivors with whom we work that what this Archdiocese is doing is betraying the pledges that they've made to be transparent and to be accountable. These survivors were betrayed by predatory priests for decades. The officials concealed that and betrayed the survivors again. And now by proposing and trying to coerce this plan upon them is a further betrayal. The reality is that the plan that was just put before the public and the Bankruptcy Court comes up with a total of $17 million for the survivors from the Archdiocese and all the parishes. That is 1% of the assets that this Archdiocese holds and controls. They hold and control $1.7 billion. Any questions about that? Look at the filings at the committee and we made this week. We demonstrate that is their cash, their asset value, and this is 1%. They're trying to cram down on the survivors their way. And I think taking another page from the the playbook of hardball legally, I can't. Oh, wait for a moment. All right. The plan that has been proposed by the Archdiocese and now promulgated by the Archbishop represents 1% of the ability that they have to pay the survivors on these claims. Let's not forget who did the harm to these survivors. They did. And by proposing this plan, they not only betray their pledge and promise of transparency and accountability, they do further harm. The Archbishop in his statement said, "We will never be able to undo the harm caused." Probably true. But they can choose to not do further harm. And they have chosen, by proposing this plan, less than or about 1% of their real ability to pay, do further harm. It is betrayal, it is deceit, and it is deception. It is disturbing. I need to address, because I watched the Archbishop's press conference, I need to address some of the comments that he made. First, it needs to be emphasized the amount of cash that the Archdiocese and the parishes in the aggregate are putting into this plan is $17 million. The rest comes from insurance and from 3 insurance companies. It would appear $17 million in total, when they have clearly $1.7 billion under their control. Some of the comments of the Archbishop, I think need to be addressed. First, he says that effectively he's blaming the survivors and us for not having a resolution, and rightfully blaming the insured, but by blaming the survivors and us for not having a resolution is disingenuous and disturbing. We gave them a chance. We worked with them to put together a plan for child protection and gave them a path. And they've chosen to take another path out of the playbook of hardball legal tactics, some employed in Milwaukee, but those tactics don't apply here and shouldn't. He said that they have not hidden any assets. That's what he said just an hour ago. Well, when we spoke and filed a motion with the committee on Tuesday, it's clearly demonstrable that they didn't list any of the cemeteries. And it's also demonstrable, because we have the pictures, that the 6 cemeteries, all listed, formerly owned and operated by the Archdiocese, are all painted over after the bankruptcy. Painted over. They also had on their website that these cemeteries were in and owned and operated by the Archdiocese. They took that off their website after the bankruptcy. They also claim that they have listed all their assets when we now have demonstrated by our filings that there is $270 million plus in the Catholic Community Foundation, which the documents show were controlled and owned by the Archbishop under his control, and after the bankruptcy they changed some of the documents to make it look otherwise. We also show that the Catholic Finance Corporation has over $30 million in assets, and they do not list that. And that was, and the documents show, under the sole control of the Archbishop. So when they say that they've listed all their assets, that's so far from the truth. It's 99% the lie. The Archbishop says we are attempting to confiscate donor-restricted funds, separately incorporated in part. He's a civil and a canon lawyer. He knows who controls those things. Yep. And we have Jamie Hutmaker. Jamie, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hutmaker. I was abused by Father Jerome Kern in 1969. I went to the Archdiocese at that point in time, and then a couple times after in the 70s and 80s. And I'm currently on the trustee committee for the bankruptcy.
Jamie, we've invited you here today because the Archdiocese just filed its plan, and the Archbishop just did a press conference, and we're now reacting to that, and we're going to want your reaction to it and how you feel about what you've heard. I've already told the folks that what they're proposing is to put $17 million into the plan of their money, including for the parishes, and it's our view that the documents show clearly that that's 1% of their true ability to pay. I was addressing comments made by the Archdiocese. He says he wants to do what is right. How many times have we heard that platitude from them? And how many times have we seen them make the choice to do what is wrong? That is, to protect offenders and protect themselves and their own assets. Exactly what they're doing today, protecting themselves and their own assets. And now, proposing this plan to avoid having to account for the harm that they did to the 440 survivors who have filed claims against them in the bankruptcy. And God only knows how many more there are of those folks that didn't file or couldn't, because they may not be with us. The Archbishop said that they're bringing assets together and bringing the assets together as we have suggested they need to is contrary to law. Well, their law says they're all held by the Archdiocese and the Archbishop. And he's a civil and he's a canon lawyer. That's a lie. That's a lie. It's not contrary to law. He also said that to do any more compensation out of the funds and the vast wealth of this archdiocese would impede their charitable work. Would impede their charitable work? When they, for decades, have allowed offenders at large to do harm to countless survivors like you, Jamie? Was that charitable? And to now deceive the public and the parishioners and the survivors and I believe the court here is far from charitable, but to do justice isn't. And the fact is that there is no attempt in the motion that we have brought to bring in Catholic Charities. It's controlled by them, but that's where they do their charitable work. But they're not. Catholic Charities is not subject to our motion and the committee's motion to bring it in. And so when he says to have to pay more than the 1% they're willing to pay would impede their charitable work is just disingenuous at best and alarming. Because it's out of the same playbook that we've seen the archbishops operate for 30 years. What made me expect more? What made me think there could be a better way for them to do business than what we've seen in the past? The Archbishop also said that this plan is exceeds 70% in terms of average recovery of all the others that have been made in bankruptcy with survivors. That is deception. And the facts belie that. And we're going to address the facts in a moment. The reality is that there are only two other comparisons where there were cases like this. And the average recovery in those cases in California and in Delaware was $1 million per survivor. And for him to say that this is 70% better than the others among the top 30% is just, he knows better. And they know better. But I'm not sure they care. In fact, demonstrably they don't. Their actions, again, speak to the betrayal of their pledge to be transparent, because they not only hid assets, but they have changed documents, they've painted over signs, they have failed to disclose the assets that they do have under the control. In part, says the Archbishop, but actually the reality is it's in whole. And they continue to attempt to deceive the survivors. And to that extent, they do further harm. And before Jamie addresses what he has heard and how he feels about what he has experienced now, as they've proposed this plan, we'd like to get to some facts. Fact number one is their ability to pay is $1.7 billion. And that's what should be in this plan. Or something that approaches a fair resolution to the 440 survivors. And then what would be a fair resolution? They say you have to look at all the bankruptcies filed. Fact is that if you look at the bankruptcies and the claims where there were no statutes of limitations, such as in Minnesota, when you look at all the other cases where there were window legislation that we've had, and you look at the settlements that were made in and out of the bankruptcy, and you look at all these other cases in blue, there's the average settlement per survivor across the board, across the country. And when you look at the plan that this Archbishop is proposing, here it is right here. Per survivor.
What's the amount?
Right there.
$142,000.
$142,000 per survivor. When you look at San Diego and California, it was in excess of $1 million per survivor. There was a window there, just like Minnesota. When you look at Delaware, there was a window there, a little different than Minnesota, but nonetheless, the average was $750,000. And when you look at all the other bankruptcies that they're referring to, there were statutes of limitations that barred those claims, the same way the Archdiocese has hidden behind the statute of limitations here before 3 years ago, that barred those claims. Those don't count. If history informs, this is what informs. Another fact. First, they claim that this is fair. And it's coming from the parishes. Some of the money is coming from the parishes. But the $13 million that they identified as coming from the parishes is from an insurance company. Insurance companies. There's not a dollar coming from the parishes in this. And at the same time, under this plan, all the claims that the survivors have brought or could ever bring would be cut off by what they call a channeling injunction. And no survivor could bring any further claims at any time. And so for them to say that this is some way fair to the survivors who have come forward or those yet to is, again, disingenuous.
They could bring no other claims against the parishes or?
Yes.
Parishes or the Archdiocese. So it's a channeling injunction that this plan gets and seeks the court to approve that prevents any claims against any Catholic entity, Archdiocese affiliated, or the parishes under its control.
What they're asking the court to do is to approve them paying 1% of their assets in order for them to get off free, every parish, and the Archdiocese get off completely free for 1% of their assets is what they're asking here.
Let's look at another aspect. They claim they have $17 million then to pay the claims. But let's look at the facts. The cathedral in that is valued at, that cathedral right there, and the property in which it sits, $0. They claim that De La Salle, which is owned by them, and the property in which it sits owned by them and operated by them, 0. That's their evaluation. Totino Grace, property owned by the Archdiocese and operated by them, value, according to them and this plan, 0. Benilde St. Margaret's, the property on which it sits and the school operated by them, the value they claim to be 0. This plan, what else do you want to say about that, Mike?
You put up the insurance one. So here what we have, so they're telling the public and the court that the cathedral is worth nothing. In their own internal documents released for the first time today, their insurance documents, when they have to get insurance, what they list the cathedral as there, over $68 million. So they're telling the public and the court today in their filings that it's worth 0. What they're telling their insurance company that it's worth is over $68 million.
The same kind of documents would apply to Totino Grace, De La Salle, and Benilde St. Margaret's. And the insured values there are in the millions and millions of dollars, but they choose to list them as 0. The other thing that I think bears a mentioning is what isn't included. And we've already mentioned some of those things, but the Catholic Community Foundation, the Catholic cemeteries, and the Catholic Finance Corporation. And when you take the parish assets that they did, and in the financial records of the Archdiocese that controls the finances and the borrowing and the lending to the parishes, and you look at the balance sheets we put in our filings, the parish asset values are in excess alone of $1 billion. And that's in the filings that we made this week. The parish assets alone, under the control of the Archbishop, are in excess of $1 billion.
Stacy, do you want to put up the first page of the insurance? We'll have James.
I think
In that same insurance document that released today for the first time, the number that they have for their building and personal property, so that's everything that they have, when they're telling their insurance company as of 2007, they're saying they have over $2.5 billion is what they say the value of that is.
it's their documents.
So they're insuring it for 2.5.
Yeah, they're saying that the value is, yes, that they're insuring it for that value.
So they're either lying to their insurance companies or they're lying to us. And to the survivors, again, and to the public. Jamie, I want you to come up here. Spell your last name.
Sure, it's Hutmaker, Heutmaker.
Jamie, just by way of introduction, you're one of the survivors, having been abused by a priest by the name of Kern. And you're also on the creditors committee.
Correct.
Representing all the 440 survivors who have now filed claims in the Archdiocese bankruptcy. And how do you feel, and what's your reaction to what you've heard and seen about the Archbishop's statement and the plan that they have now put to the public and to the court? What are you feeling?
For the umpteenth time, betrayal comes to mind first. One thing I've discovered in the last few years is that I repressed a lot of a lot of emotion of what happened to me and how it affected me. And so over the past few years, I've been peeling back the layers and finding all sorts of interesting things. And so I, like many others, are going through a healing process. I think it's different for everybody. But for 47 years, I've been watching this go on and hear the promises to take care of this, to stop this, to keep the children safe. And unfortunately, like Jeff said, I don't know why I had hoped that things would be different with the new Archbishop, even though he said they would be. And here we are, feeling lied to, feeling betrayed again. And I honestly, at least in my case, I honestly don't know that I'll fully be able to heal until it's fully acknowledged and that we know they've taken the steps to make sure that children are safe. And it's just incredulous to me that they would come up with an offer like this when we've actually heard different numbers, even higher numbers before. And I also want to point out that for me and most of the survivors, all the survivors that I can speak to, it's not just about the money, it's about stopping the abuse. And again, my parents went to the parish, the Archdiocese in 1969 when this first happened to me. We followed up again in the 70s and in the 80s with the same promises. Yep, we'll take care of it, we'll take care of it. Here it is, 2016. And nothing has changed. And for me, I feel like an institution such as this should be held to a higher standard. And for being a part of this committee, this trustee committee, I feel like there's been absolutely no genuine compassion towards the victims. It feels like a bankruptcy with a business that is less than ethical to me. And it's just the same disappointment all over again and all over again. And I don't understand why the church, if they had, even in 1969, there would have been, when there were very few victims that had been recorded at that point in time. We're talking hundreds now that needlessly were abused, could have been totally avoided if the church would have lived by the rules that they teach us. We make a mistake, we go to confession, we confess our sins, we do our penance, we're forgiven, we move on. Can they do that? Have they done that? No. And for me, I've been unable to go back to the Catholic Church. And, but yet, this might sound a little large-headed, but I actually feel like I'm a better Christian than many of these people are that are running this institution, because I've witnessed the broken promises and the lies and the lack of compassion and words just not at all matching the actions. I'm so disappointed and frustrated, and it just, the longer this goes, the more frustrated and angry I get.
Jamie, I want to share with you and share when I called one of your colleague survivors who sits on the creditors committee with you, Jim Keenan, and I told him the plan that they had just proposed and what the Archbishop said. I'm going to tell you what he said to me. He said, "Jeff, they're just re-victimizing me again." He said, "Jeff, this is just more betrayal heaped upon deception. And now it's more coercion." Those are Jim Keenan's words. And coercion is the right word. And betrayal is the operative theme here. And lack of accountability also is. Because until there is justice and accountability, there is more harm being done to Jamie and every survivor on whose behalf you speak and we work. And until they do the truth and take the action to make sure there is accountability, we will have to speak and we will have to act with rigor and call them out. They also, in this plan, there's a real, there's so many insidious parts of this, but there's a provision in there that none of you would have time to have seen. But it says that every official that has been in the Archdiocese would, if this plan is approved by the court, be immune from any individual accountability. Yeah. Any official would be immune from any individual accountability. In other words, the slate is swiped clean against every single official, present and past.